Jen. This is the last part of the observation, is the reflective conference where we talk about everything that went on and what I observed.
Okay.
And just to remind you, we had 3 goals that we set up for me to observe. The integrating of reading into math. This was their first experience really having them read in the math area, and using appropriate comprehension strategies to teach them, and having them be able to analyze and evaluate and summarize what they read and help them stimulate a discussion.
Okay.
And then we had the cooperative learning, where you wanted to make sure that you had it set up so they could work productively and cooperatively in their groups, and you would be able to monitor to see how well this went. And then finally we also talked about designing your instruction to provide for differentiation and individual learners, not only in this one class but in among all of your classes as they're at different levels.
Right.
So we're in agreement on that. So to start with, let's talk about what elements of your lesson do you feel went well?
I think the opening and the closing of it, especially the closing of the lesson, just letting them know that when we come back on Monday, setting that anticipation of we're going to get into the math side, that I think went well for them, and I liked how I ended that. So that was one part. Some of the questioning went pretty well, I thought. Some of it could have been better. And I also think overall they did a good job reading the material and getting, we did get some product here, and we were able to see what they took out of the reading. So all of that, I would say, were successes.
I agree. And I also think that your opening particularly, you did set a purpose why we're doing this, and you gave a personal example, and you asked for background knowledge, how many have heard of Pascal and everything. So I agree with you, and I really like the ending because it gave your students something to look forward to. It was a really teaser. It kind of jumped out there. Oh wow, look at this, and seeing all those circles and everything, they could imagine what it was they were going to do with it. So I think you didn't tell them what it was going to look like when it was finished, but you left that open. Well, let's look a little bit at the data. Here's the end product that we got. We got, you asked them to write a summary, and your summary was just 4 parts, and you said you wanted them to analyze and you wanted them to evaluate. And as we look at this, some of them did a pretty good job as a group. Some of them did a little bit, did some things in here that maybe with a little more instruction and modeling, they might have done a better job on. He was homeschooled and went to meetings with his dad at a young age. And I'm wondering what would happen if you had instructed them and modeled for them how they would do this and make sure that all the information was related to Pascal as a mathematician.
And not just background,
his personal life.
Okay.
If he put something personal in there, relate it to mathematics as he did that.
Okay.
And I was also, you did use your smartboard. You had a picture of Pascal up there. I noticed last year when you were using your smartboard teaching math, you had a lot of things up there, like examples and steps and other things up there. I'm wondering what might be something you might use your smartboard for when you're actually teaching a reading lesson.
I think I could have used it in this case to put the graphic organizer up and do some modeling of, like you said, how do you summarize and analyze him not only as a person, but how it ties into him as a mathematician. And if I maybe would have modeled one of the 4 spots on the graphic organizer using my smartboard, that definitely might have, would have helped the students. I think when I was giving rules and tasks for what we were going to do during the class period, I could have had those up on the smartboard as a reminder, as a prompt for them. I certainly could have done that.
And if you recall, you did go over the learning target, and in the learning target it used the word evaluate, analyze, and summarize. And I'm thinking it might have been important for you to cover what those were and how to do them, because you can't really determine if this was what you really wanted because you didn't cover all parts of the of what it was they were supposed to do.
So I didn't show them how to or what analyzing is and what evaluating is. Okay.
And you know, you could have said, now what did you have to do to get this answer? What kind of process did you go through?
Okay.
And you know, how do you do this?
Okay.
So those two things I think might have helped that a little bit.
Okay.
And then we talked about the cooperative learning. How did you feel about them working in groups? Were you comfortable with that?
I haven't done a lot of group work, as you saw last year when you would observe me. So again, it was a newer experience for me. I just had them grouped according to where they normally sit in the classroom. That's how I determined where they sat. And I felt like it was crowded, so it was very difficult for me at times to get around to all the students. So I kept walking the outside perimeter of the group because it was hard to go and see all the groups inside.
And you know, what I observed and the notes that I made showed that.
Exactly.
One time you went in there, but it took you quite a while to get through.
It was hard to do, and I felt like
so
I was
close
tripping
together.
around and I didn't even really think that through. I thought we had enough room, and by the time the students were in their seats, it didn't leave me enough room.
And another thing I noticed too, when you had the discussion, you asked 10 questions. You asked for 10 examples. You'd say, you know, you would say what was something you found, and then the student would answer, and what was something else. 10 times you did that. And if you look at what I have here, 9 of those questions, 9 of those examples came from 2 groups.
So 9 out of the 10 I asked were only in 2 groups.
And then you had 1 over here. So it looked to me like you had a tendency to kind of favor the right side of the room.
Okay.
Were you aware of that?
I did not realize I was going to one side more than the other till you show me the data.
Yeah. That was your students. And I noticed also when you were walking around that you didn't really stop any place. Did you have a purpose why you were walking around? Was there something you particularly wanted to observe and find out?
I think I just wanted to see how far on task they were, were they close to finishing, were they not close to finishing, so I knew when to bring them back as a whole group.
Can you think of anything else that you might have done when you walked around that might even be more instructional or more directive? Or
what I might look for, are they just writing sentences down and copying word for word, or are they taking larger pieces and summarizing it down into not just sentences that they're copying from the paper, but more in their own words to learn how to paraphrase?
So if you had actually taught them those skills up front, you would know then if they were understanding and applying it.
Then I could stop at the groups and actually see if they were, like you said, applying it.
Absolutely. And really those verbs that you chose and you had on your target were higher level verbs, which indicates higher level questions, but most of the responses you got were literal level responses. So what I'm hearing you say is, you know, I need to step it up a little bit and analyze myself what my students are being asked to do.
Okay.
And then we also talked a little bit about individual differences. And I know that that's not just important just with your class, but it's important among your classes when you have different ability levels. And I'm just thinking, what might be some of the things that you might want to think about teaching this lesson and doing with those groups that maybe don't understand?
I didn't talk about any of the vocabulary, and maybe we should have went into some of that vocabulary pre-reading to help when they were reading. I could have modeled maybe 2 things on the graphic organizer, maybe for the groups that needed more than 1. I could have definitely went more on the example of what does analyze mean. I guess being new to using this in my classroom, maybe I assumed the language arts teachers covered it with them, and they do, but that the students already knew, and I guess I asked them to do something but really didn't show them what that is. So I thought I was doing that when I probably really wasn't.
And when you model it, then one of the things you might want to keep in mind is that you use the word analyze, and you analyze and show them how to do it.
Okay.
And then maybe do an analysis task or something. And had you considered that with some of your lower functioning groups that you might have to break it down? Had you thought about breaking it down and not doing it all in one day? Or
That is a really good suggestion to do. I hadn't really thought of that, but that might very well be something to do more in a sequential basis, and like you said, break it down, especially for classes that maybe struggle a little more in this area.
And how else might you use the smartboard? You said, I could put my graphic organizer up there, but is there any other way you could use the smartboard, do you think?
We could have used it for the vocabulary. We could have used it for pictures that supported the vocabulary. There's lots of things I could have done, and I didn't use it a lot in this lesson. And I think now that I can reflect on it, the smartboard use would have been much better if I could have implemented it more and with the pictures and the vocabulary.
But one thing I really want to caution you about, it takes a long time and a lot of practice to teach kids how to read and comprehend material.
Okay.
And especially in a math class, because they're not used to reading and comprehending math. So it's something that you're not going to be able to do in a week.
Okay.
So I think it's important to set some short-term goals and some long-term goals. By the end of this school year, how do I want my kids to be able to read, interpret, and use readings in math? You're not going to have a lot of times you're going to read in math.
Right.
So you're going to have to plan, I think, very carefully on how you're going to use your materials.
And make those times count, I'm
That's
sure.
right. That's right.
Okay.
So let me just ask you, what would be the next couple of things you would want to zero in on next time you do this? Or
I would be very careful how I picked my groups and how I arranged the groups. That would be one thing. I would also, when I looked at the reading, I would make sure to teach the reading strategies. And I feel like although I did this, I still was relying on the reading teachers and assuming they had already taught that strategy. So I would take those strategies. I would do the modeling. We would have talked vocabulary. I didn't even think about touching on vocabulary. So maybe even work with a language arts teacher who has more experience.
Use the terminology, evaluate and analyze. And reading teachers don't teach all the strategies at one time.
Okay.
They will just take one or two, and the kids will be good on that, and then they'll add something, and that'll strengthen their reading, I think, in both areas.
And I think I also would look at the differentiation side of it too. What could I have done differently there? And I've already come up with some things, but it was after I taught the lesson, not before.
We just had to sit and talk about it, and I think sometimes that's the best thing to do. So overall, are you glad you did this lesson?
I am. It's always hard to do something the first time, and you're jumping in blindly sometimes. It was not a failure, in my opinion.
No.
It definitely could be better, but that's how I'm going to just grow and get better. And it's a start in the right direction. And I have a lot of time this school year to keep going.
And I really applaud you for stepping into it the first week of school and not waiting, because you just want to start the year off right. And I'm sure in the long run that will help your students.
It'll help both of us. It'll help them. It'll definitely help me grow as a teacher.
So overall, you're pleased with the lesson?
I am pleased. I'm pleased just for taking that initial first risk and feeling happy with, taking a risk in my teaching.
Absolutely. All right, great.